The Golden Globes have wrapped up, and with 4 wins, Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another looks well positioned as the favorite to win Best Picture at the Oscars later this year, which I'm sure is going to elicit just a wave of responses such as this.
A pretentious, morally bankrupt Hollywood circle jerk that glorifies domestic terrorism and is more interested in taking shots at the current administration than crafting a compelling story.
Oh my gosh. Like, again, you can make excuses for it, but basically the thing's an apologia for radical left-wing terrorism. That's what it is.
So it is definitely woke. It is a fucking woke movie. It is woke Hollywood.
But to my fellow critics who may be more politically leaning, I say, let's just pump the brakes a little bit. These hot takes were prevalent at the release of the film and are likely to multiply like weeds if, or I guess more when, it wins. Whereas last year, I pretty much launched this channel by slamming Oscar frontrunner Emilia Perez, this year, we're going a bit of a different direction. We're gonna throw a nice cold ice bucket on the spicy fires of political discourse. Now, before we all get too excited here, let's take one big breath together. Ready? In and out. Feel a little better? Good. Because this is not a political channel. It never has been and never will be. I think most people here can't even figure out which side of the aisle I'm even on, and I'm very happy to keep it that way.
And whose side are you on?
I am on nobody's side, because nobody is on my side, little hawk.
But I'm here to argue that the heated political discourse is exactly why this film is a great bottle piece of our current time, and what makes it worthy of the title of Best Picture. Now, stay with me here, lads and lasses. We're gonna get there. One Battle After Another on the surface level may seem a little ill-timed. After all, most of our protagonists are a group of far-left revolutionaries, or I guess terrorists depending on your perspective. The French 75 are responsible for carrying out kidnappings, detention center breakouts, bombings on political offices, bank heists, and more. Given the recent heightened tensions and outbreak of political violence in the United States, especially in 2025, and I guess so far 2026 isn't doing much better, it may seem that the film is unwittingly or ignorantly fanning the flames of political ire. Now, that would be the less charitable viewpoint. Or rather, you could see it as it's holding up a timely microscope to the climate of the now, as a depiction of this almost sort of siren song of the rebellious spirit. I think those trying to simplify this movie down to pro-extremism, or just outright satire of extremism, they're missing the forest for the trees. I would equate this to seeing a picture of Mount Vesuvius erupting and thinking that this must somehow be an endorsement for the destruction of Pompeii. Despite its divisive qualities, the film has received an overwhelmingly positive reception, both from critics and, honestly, kind of from the audience as well. How can we reconcile this positive reception against the times? Full spoilers, by the way, for this entire movie. In One Battle After Another, Paul Thomas Anderson is playing a delicate balancing act. The fictional far-left group, the French 75, are uncontrolled anarchy, and no one is more loyal to the cause than Perfidia Beverly Hills, a true wannabe revolutionary at heart, so dedicated to this Viva la Revolution that she'll commit almost any kind of crime, including the sexual harassment of one poor little army commander. Before you feel too bad for old Lockjaw, he was kind of, a little into it, and also happens to be a far-right racist who's doing his best to suppress his interracial romantic attractions, while ironically also courting a position with a group of white supremacists.
I am a Christmas adventurer!
If you're really taking all of this too seriously, you may have missed a beat. Again, the movie's entire inciting incident surrounds a character by the name of Perfidia, as in like perfidious? Get it? Do you get it? All of this is an early signal that we aren't exactly married to reality here. It all has this layer of just a cartoonishness, a tongue-in-cheek spirit. But make no mistake, this is no outright farce. What we have at the film's opening is two extremes on vastly different ends of the spectrum. Both Lockjaw and Perfidia are terrible people in very different ways. And they're also undone by their extremist views in also very different ways. Perfidia's obsession with the cause leads her to cheat on her husband with Major Lockjaw, and this is all under this kind of self-delusion of keeping the rebellion alive. Well, honestly, it's more likely she's looking to satisfy her own adrenaline junkie high and a need for high stakes and high rewards. She commits countless crimes that could harm innocents. She drinks with a devil-may-care attitude while pregnant.
It's like she doesn't even realize she's pregnant.
She even abandons her husband and newborn child, all to chase that rebellious dream.
Do the revolution, baby. Go do it.
Yet, it's all kind of a mask. The law ultimately catches up to her, and when push comes to shove, she rats on her comrades, all to pull her own fat from the fire. And when the dust finally settles, she just skips on off to Mexico scot-free, leaving everyone else to deal with the fallout. If she was meant to strike an inspiring figure, Anderson did a poor job of selling it. But again, I don't actually believe that was her purpose. Now, Lockjaw, he exists on the complete other end of the spectrum, an entirely different animal, played brilliantly by Sean Penn. It's a role that transforms him into this stiff-walking racist Popeye who maybe skipped out on doing his daily stretches.
Why is your shirt so tight?
His obsession with bringing in the 75 and desire for acceptance from the supremacist white Christmas adventurers, they're constantly at odds with his own repressed sexual desires. In many ways, One Battle After Another is a cinematic manifestation of the concept of the political horseshoe theory, that those on the far ends of the political spectrum have more in common with each other than they do with those perhaps in the middle. In some ways, Lockjaw and Perfidia are opposites who attract, immoral and harmful to the ones around them, and just these tornadoes of chaos.
I loved her in case you were wondering. She was a warrior, a righteous warrior of freedom.
She was a fucking rat!
While these two represent the far ends of the political spectrum, the movie's sympathies are more saved for those closer to the middle. And I am using closer very loosely here. This is most notable in Perfidia's daughter, Willa, and maybe to a lesser extent, Bob. Willa represents innocence caught in a conflict, a personality with left-leaning views certainly, but yet uncommitted to a real cause. However, Lockjaw still treats her like an enemy combatant all the same. Leonardo DiCaprio's Bob, meanwhile, is a wreck of a man, a revolutionary in it for love more than the actual cause itself. He is a paranoid father crippled by his anxieties and forced to cope through excessive weed and alcohol. He is haunted by his old ways and terrified of the past catching up to him, often referring to his old actions as bad shit.
Me and Willa's mom, we used to run around and do some real bad shit together. You're a bad hombre, Bob.
There is a layer of regret and wistful memory of the days of rebellion, mixed with almost this romanticism. The only real constant he has is in his obsessive need to be there for the ones he cares about. Despite being this burned out anxiety wreck of a man, Bob was the only one through the entire movie consistently making the right choice. Well, I mean, maybe not so much at the beginning, but, as the film was going on, in the main core of the narrative. He sacrifices his own dreams and ambition for parenthood and taking care of his one true responsibility, choosing to be a father over a soldier. He even stands by her when the film makes it ambiguous from the get-go if Willa is even his own flesh and blood. It's only when his daughter is in danger that Bob finds his rebellious spirit reignited once again.
Damn it! Viva la revolution!
He's a man who seems more motivated by those he cares about rather than any hardline ideals. Not that he's supposed to be taken overly seriously. Make no mistake, Bob is the main source of levity in the film, and this source of comedy has made it mighty tempting to paint the entire film with a broad brush and just call it outright satire. That would be an overly convenient way out of this political violence conundrum, one that even the director himself tried to use as an exit strategy. And though the movie is quite funny, I can't in good faith call it outright satire. In fact, I would put this much closer to something like Fargo, a balanced mix of drama, comedy, and clearly having something to say. Except, I think in this case, its message is a little bit more complex than just crime is dumb. Like a Coen Brothers crime drama, One Battle After Another has a colorful cast of characters that gets themselves into hot water, often due to just stupidity, and they have to deal with the ramifications. You have Fargo, No Country for Old Men, and maybe to a lesser extent, The Big Lebowski. All of these fit this mold. In fact, I would argue Paul Thomas Anderson made a better Coen Brothers movie last year than the Coen Brothers did, with the kind of suffocatingly terrible Honey Don't. It is difficult for a movie to have the perfect timing in terms of cultural relevancy and current events. After all, between pre-production, production, and post, it's easy to miss that train. But don't give Paul Thomas Anderson too much credit. Much of this was just down to dumb luck, or I guess bad timing, depending on, again, how you feel about the movie. Do not confuse this with something like Don't Look Up, a movie born of its time, a film that sought to capture the societal pressures tied to global warming, and ended up kind of being wrapped into the entire COVID pandemic. Also, do not confuse it with more mainstream films like The Dark Knight Rises, that sought to tap into the existing energy of the Occupy Wall Street movement. These were movies looking to capitalize on an existing boiling point. It was already there. Nor is this film retrospective, like Eddington was early last year, which tried to recapture COVID's impacts in divided communities, basically digging nails into fresh wounds. Retrospective cultural films are a dime a dozen, but they can be very effective. I would argue that One Battle After Another actually has more in common with another film, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Again, please stay with me here, all right? I haven't gone crazy yet. I'm not saying The Winter Soldier revolutionized cinema or was high cinema, but what it did do was accidentally stumble on a moment. The Winter Soldier had perfect timing. Though produced all the way back in 2012, it ended up being released in 2014, where it could capitalize on the very relevant 2013 Snowden leaks, exposing the extent of government surveillance, which completely tied into its own plot. In a way, the timing could not have been better. The date lined up for the Winter Soldier to play into this timely conversation, and it made whatever it was saying seem all the more important just for that timing. Now, could the Russo brothers have known this? Not without a hell of a crystal ball. One Battle After Another has similarly, just sort of by coincidence, landed at the same topical time where there's heightened social tension. Was it trying to make deep, poignant social commentary so close to the assassination of a major conservative figure? ICE crackdowns, protests, or general discontent? Again, not unless Anderson had access to the Russos' crystal ball. One Battle went into production in early 2024, before the results of the new presidential election were even known. So they didn't really know what the policies of the new administration were even going to be. And Paul Thomas Anderson has also stated he came up with this idea as early as the 2000s, or even 1999. Landing so close to all of this really just put it under a kind of microscope, a cocktail of both positives and negatives. I want to flash back to another old film, this time The Manchurian Candidate, released in 1962, but based on a book from 1959 at the height of the Cold War and the McCarthy-era Red Scare. It was a story that told of an army veteran brainwashed by China and Russia to become this sleeper agent who's activated by code words. It was a book-turned-movie with a finger to the temple of the culture. Hollywood itself had skin in the game, as the McCarthy-era witch hunts led to such talents as Charlie Chaplin and Spartacus screenwriter Trumbo being blacklisted for a long period. The Manchurian Candidate is this piece of communist paranoia that's preserved in amber, perfectly capturing the hysteria of the time while also being this model for people's unreasonable fear and a portrait of the absurdity. This is one of the reasons Robert Ebert named it as one of his best movies of that year. It's still remembered today. They even made a remake with Denzel Washington. Like Manchurian Candidate, it can be debated if One Battle After Another is an accurate portrait of the time. Or also, like Manchurian Candidate, is it influenced by the temperature in the room? I would argue both have their value. Remembering back to that Vesuvius picture, a portrait does not necessarily mean an endorsement. I'd even say One Battle After Another has little interest in picking a side or pushing some sort of agenda, as much as our right-wing critics have tried to label it woke cinema. Movies that are making moral, political, or ideological stances, there's nothing new about them. They have been around since the 1910s with Where Are My Children, which made an argument for birth control for women but against abortion. It had a clear message, and it managed to do it without anyone being able to speak a single word. Some of the best movies ever made are trying to send some sort of message. However, I don't really think One Battle After Another is really looking to pick a clear side in any sort of modern political topic. In fact, it seems almost stuck in the revolutionary movements of the 1960s. It is not exactly picking a side like, say, 12 Angry Men did, which featured a standout moment when all the jurors stood and turned their back on a bigot in their midst. Now, this was an overt statement, theatrical and flashy, but today it stands as one of the monumental moments of cinema. They certainly had a message. So what's Paul Thomas Anderson's? It is less overtly political and more kinda extrospective. The question is, what exactly is it trying to say? That left-wing terrorism is great? No, I think the treatment of Perfidia is pretty proof of that. She begins as an idealist, then is corrupted by her goals, betrays the cause, and ends up isolated, alone, and disillusioned, absent in her own story. Instead, her only impact comes in the form of a letter, coping with broken dreams and broken hopes, and for some, that will already be too generous of a legacy. Yet the letter serves as a final delivery mechanism for the film's themes. This movie is not about if political extremism is right or wrong. To hyperfixate on that is to be captured by fast-flowing current events. Rather, as I see it, one battle after another seeks to replicate the continuous cycle of the rebellious spirit, how it shines bright at the beginning, when the embers die, and when it is reborn. It's the desire to change the world and transform it by pure strength of will. It is the hopeful call for change, and how sometimes that road to hell is often paved with those good intentions, and how that cycle may be doomed to repeat itself over and over again. And you don't even have to take my word for it. In an interview, Paul Thomas Anderson said the following: "Our jumping off point really was the revolutionary movements of the 60s with the Weather Underground, the Black Panthers, and that kind of thing. And looking at what happened to them as a result of all their ideology and all of, maybe, some of their best intentions, which got very skewed and created a general lonely life for most of them." Now, typically he's not so blunt, but in this case, I think this is Anderson really saying the quiet part out loud and explaining the full moral of the movie. All in this very easy to understand, unconditional terms, all right? It's almost like he knew, kinda, at what time his movie was being screened. Now, if I could represent all of this in graph form, I think it would look something like this. First, you have the call for change, or desperation for change. Then you have thriving revolution, then corruption, then disillusionment, then a rekindling. And then we get to see the cycle repeat in full. Let's use Perfidia as our first example. She was a true believer of the revolution and the cause, the perfect soldier. However, in her desire to enact good, she became a force for chaos, not caring who she hurts to get what she wants, including her own family. You see her abandon everything that's actually good in her life, in both her daughter and her husband. She corrupts herself by quite literally sleeping with the enemy, and then, after being captured, becomes desperate and disillusioned, giving up her fellow soldiers, all to save herself, entirely betraying the entire rebellion. However, she then finds hope in that rekindling, reigniting that rebellious spark in her own child. You see it in Lockjaw, a man whose desire for change is far more blunt and cruel. We meet him as a man looking to do his job and do it well. Well, at least that's all we really know about him when we see him. For all we know, he could have been just as big of a piece of garbage at the beginning. He later becomes entranced and controlled by desires or romantic sexual attraction beyond his job, in the form of his affair with Perfidia. He uses this relationship to hunt down his enemies with a vicious efficiency, then discovers the person he loves does not love him back, and in retaliation, joins a secret society of white supremacists, perhaps out of spite or deep sexual repression, or he does it just because deep down, he has always been a complete psychopath racist piece of garbage. I'm leaning towards this one. Either way, he becomes more concerned with winning the approval of the Christmas adventurers than anything else, all to the extent he puts blinders on and walks to his own death believing he achieved everything he ever wanted, and has this just bright, glorious future ahead of him. But most of all, I think you can see that this rebellious cycle works for Bob. Bob begins as a man completely motivated by love. Then he finds this love corrupted when he begins building bombs for Perfidia and doing what he himself describes as that bad shit. And after all of that, he's abandoned, and he's left as this husk of who he used to be. However, he does find his own spark again, reignited in the motivation to save his daughter, and perhaps, again, passing that spark off to her. Look, you can get lost forever in the winding maze of politics on if the French 75 are right or wrong. Personally, I don't think it matters, because that misses the point. It is about the call to action, and what makes people abandon their causes, how that brilliant spark starts, and the enthusiasm for something that's so important to someone, and how it can turn sour. Simplistic right or wrong morality is easy to find in the days of the Hays Code. This was a time in film where they were forced to conform to very strict social messaging. But we got rid of the code for a reason. Film is about feeling, not morality. It is about making the audience feel something through the characters, not to depict society winning in its most correct state. One battle after another captures a cycle of frustration and hope. Everyone, I think, is kind of looking to do what's best, to take that sense of rebellion and put it to use doing something good. And everyone, I think, is capable of becoming some sort of monster in the pursuit of greater good. All of us are capable of losing our faith in values we once held close, and all of us can find a way to start that fire anew. Much of the human condition is seeking positive change and often failing to get it. and in the process losing track of what we were so desperately reaching for to begin with.
Life, man. Life!
Is because of this that one battle after another manages to capture deep-running human conditions, not political or social, but something that runs parallel to both sides of the political spectrum. A movie that's preserving the year in a piece of amber, the spirit of 2025, and the real movie worthy of the title of Best Picture. But that's all I got for this one. Am I reaching here? Is this just left-wing propaganda, or is it a window into the universal spirit of rebellion? You tell me in those comments down below. We're gonna be back here soon. I've got my final quarterly update for 2025 coming up, as well as finally, I'm getting to Wheel of Time Season 2. Thank you again, and keep those reels turning.